Good evening and welcome to the second forum in our series on evaluating climate solutions. My name is David Greenberg and I am a member of the Massachusetts chapter of Elder Climate Action. This series has been organized in memory of Larry Rosenberg, a lifelong progressive activist and a good friend of mine. Those of you who were in Boston in the 70s may have heard Swing Shift, the political rock band of which Larry and I were a part. Larry was an early member of both 350 Massachusetts and the Massachusetts chapter of Elders Climate Action. From union organizing to Central American solidarity work, from advocating for a just Middle East peace to pushing for climate action, his insightful analysis and enduring commitments made him a meaningful contributor to positive change. His sharp intellect also led to jobs programming wind farm software, leading an anti-military weapon proliferation research team, and supporting health-focused international development projects. After years of living with lymphoma, and shortly after the COVID pandemic began, Larry's cancer turned virulent. He died in 2022. Before I introduce our moderator for this evening, we would like to play a short video from Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, who has been actively involved in Green Bank legislation at the national level. Or not. Okay, it looks like we've got some technical difficulties with the video. Ariana's going to try it again.
Solar projects, housing efficiency. Thank you for the opportunity to join you in this webinar series hosted by 350 Mass and Elders Climate Action to discuss the power of green banks. I would also like to recognize Larry Rosenberg, whose lifetime of activism as an early member of both 350 Massachusetts and the Elders Climate Action Massachusetts will never be forgotten. Thank you so much. For more than a decade, I've envisioned a national climate bank, a one-of-a-kind engine that would propel our climate goals into climate gains. We would bring real dollars, not false promises, into environmental justice communities all across our country. Community solar projects, housing efficiency, electrification projects, all of it will be made possible with this bank. But a vision without funding is an hallucination. And that's why I worked hard to include my National Climate Bank Act in the historic Inflation Reduction Act signed into law last year. This idea for a National Climate Bank became the single largest climate investment in the Inflation Reduction Act, providing $20 billion for a national network of nonprofits, community leaders, and lenders and other financial institutions. This initiative is expected to leverage the power of public funding to supercharge private investment by as much as a 12-to-1 ratio. Every dollar of public money will have $12 of private money. And as of July, applications are open for this network. Governor Maura Healey recently wisely announced a landmark Massachusetts Community Climate Bank, which will focus on financing climate-friendly, affordable housing and retrofits. This national network is an investment in dreams, in capacity, in communities all across the Commonwealth and the country. I know the other folks in this series are working hard to make this investment pay off in Massachusetts and beyond. Thank you for your participation today and for your activism tomorrow. It is essential. It's $20 billion in the bank, in this climate bank, and experts say it's going to unleash another $120 to $150 billion in sustainable, clean energy energy efficiency technologies being deployed, with the disproportionate amount of it, upwards of 50%, going to those communities that have been historically most disadvantaged: Black, brown, immigrant communities. It's a big project. It's long overdue, and it's about to explode as a source of funding for clean energy projects all across our country. Thank you all for everything you do to advance this great cause.
Okay, I would like to now introduce our moderator for this evening. Lee Harris is a staff writer at the American Prospect with many bylines in her name about green banks and capital markets. She will introduce our panelists. We invite our audience to put questions in the Q&A window by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you, David. So excited to be here and to hear about Larry's history as an activist and all the great work that he did. And just a few words before I introduce the panelists, I am especially excited to be here because there's just been, as the senator said, an explosion of activity in this space. I think over the past couple of years, we've seen a real shift from thinking about global warming or the climate crisis as just a matter of stopping pollution and bad activities and regulating those, to thinking that that's important, but actually recognizing that it's a matter of investing really heavily in building new lucrative technologies across the economy in a way that sees benefits be widely spread. And so we've seen that kind of more growth-oriented mindset with the Inflation Reduction Act, which made a major investment in green banks that I'm sure we'll be talking about. And just today, we heard an announcement that there will be a National Civilian Climate Corps, which is something I know Senator Markey and others have been calling for a long time now. So there's so much movement in this space, and lots of people will be hearing about green banking for the first time, but there are folks who have been doing this work for years and thinking really deeply about the best way to design it. And there are all kinds of fascinating debates about how you do public green finance or nonprofit green finance. So with that, really excited to talk to our three panelists. Paul Mark is a state senator from Western Massachusetts, and he'll be speaking about plans for the Massachusetts Community Climate Bank, which would be the nation's first green bank dedicated to affordable housing. Nenya Young is Director of Policy and Network at the Coalition for Green Capital, and she'll provide a national perspective, including the role of the Inflation Reduction Act in stimulating new and existing green banks. And Bert Hunter is the Chief Investment Officer of Connecticut Green Bank. He joined in 2012, the year after it was established, and prior to joining, he was CFO of Spectrum Capital, an investment bank focused on commercial aircraft finance and investment in U.S. electric power generation. So welcome, Bert, Nina, and Paul. And maybe I'll hand it off first to Bert to talk a little bit about the work you've been doing in this space for a long time. Tell us, maybe since you're starting, what is a green bank? Could you maybe survey some of the roles that and different sort of institutional designs that green banks can have, because I know there are many, and tell us what you've learned in now over a decade in green banking. Oh, and don't forget to unmute yourself.
I was going to say, how long do you have? It's been quite a ride. Yeah, so I came to the Green Bank back in 2012, a year after it was established. Yeah, we're very fortunate in Connecticut. We have a long history of environmental policy and constructive legislation in that regard. Going back to around the year 1999, 2000. So, the legislation that actually brought forward our Green Bank came in 2011, so about midstream. And the Coalition for Green Capital, Nina's group, was very instrumental in bringing our Green Bank forward. We were the first, what we call full-scale state green bank in the country. There are a few others that maybe might have preceded us, but they were very specialized in terms of maybe working at a municipal level or certain things like that. But we touch all sectors residential, single family, multifamily, affordable multifamily, commercial, industrial, nonprofits, state and municipal interests. So we cover the entire field, and we work with a host of, the purpose of a green bank is to work with various stakeholders, sponsors, developers, contractors, and of course, capital providers, to bring them all together and to make investments in our economy that are going to result in carbon reduction, as well as bill savings for consumers and businesses that are just feeling the crushing weight of the cost of energy. Particularly these days, as we see energy markets being whipsawed from month to month, and the impacts of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and so forth. So many things that are at play, but all toward trying to help do our part to solve the climate crisis. But we operate within a policy framework. So if you said, let's give an organization just a pile of money and put them to work, right? That's not enough. There has to be a policy framework around it to set goals and objectives, and that's done, really on a national basis, but more importantly on a state by state basis. And because what we need in Connecticut is different from what's needed in Florida, what's needed in California, and so forth. So each state is going to have their different approaches to how they work on the climate crisis. In fact, in Florida, you could say they're probably not working on the climate crisis, which in and of itself is a bit of a crisis. But then you have more local actors that are working on things there. But we were set up the way we like to think, and CGC, as we call it, the Coalition for Green Capital, really got it right in terms of trying to put this together. We inherited funds from a clean energy fund, which was established a decade before. And when it was in operation, it was working only on handing out incentives for solar, incentives for fuel cells, ground source heat pumps, things of that sort. But what was recognized was that the policy needs, or the needs of our communities and our state, were just outstripping the incentives. So there needed to be a new approach. And the new approach was to say, we need to leverage the amount of capital that government has, bring in the private sector so we can do more. You just heard Senator Markey talking about the $20 billion that's coming out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, from 2 competitions, and that is going to translate into multiples. I think he said 120 to 240 billion. That's at 6 or 7 times ratio that you get, and we're actually evidence of that. So we've put 350 million of public funds to work, and that has resulted in $2.4 billion worth of clean energy investment in the state of Connecticut. So if you just look at Connecticut being 1% of the population of the country, and you just multiply that 100 times over, now you're talking about the kind of investment that can be achieved, and that was over a decade, but it's been going up. So hopefully, with the funds from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which maybe Nina might cover, a little bit more from a broader policy perspective. Hopefully, with that, green banks, other community lenders will have the funds that they need to get down to ground level and really start to make the investments in our residential buildings, our multifamily, particularly affordable multifamily, as well as other areas, transportation, school buses that are running on diesel, and we need to turn into zero emissions. But again, back to the policy frame. For example, Connecticut has a specific policy on electrifying or going to zero emission school buses. and we prioritize disadvantaged communities. We say that those have to come first because those are typically in urban areas where you have problems, more concentrated pollution aspects, higher impacts of asthma and cardiovascular diseases and things of that sort as a direct result of pollution. So those buses, for example, are supposed to be 100% zero emission by 2030. And they give the rest of the state another 10 years to come along for the ride. So yeah, all of these different changes, these transitions, are needed, and that's what green banks are working to try to achieve by taking it, leveraging the private capital, but also importantly being at the table, helping government understand what kind of policies are needed to activate all of this investment. I'll stop there and we can kind of continue.
Awesome. Thanks, Bert. Nina, would you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Bert. I'm definitely going to add on to your comments. I also want to thank the organizers for the invitation to participate this evening. I actually think I had the opportunity to speak to many of you before in a smaller convening several months ago. So while I might not be able to see your faces because it's a webinar, it's great to be back and to continue the conversation with this group. And so we are 22 days out from submitting applications to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. As it was mentioned, it is a $27 billion competition to capitalize and catalyze, another C word I can't think of, but really create market transformation. And then I also want to highlight community transformation. I don't want to lose sight that these financial resources are really meant to serve the communities that need it the most. So as Lee mentioned, I work for Coalition for Green Capital, and the organization was established in 2009 with the initial intent of creating a national green bank. And so for over a decade, the organization has championed many conversations, many opportunities, particularly starting at the federal level, to have a national green bank, and working with initially Senator Christopher Holland on the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009. But that was not successful. And so the organization shifted to working with state and local leaders to establish green banks across the country. And so for a decade, it has really been our sole focus and purpose to support states like Connecticut. We were also really instrumental in establishing the New York Green Bank. And over time, Montgomery County Green Bank, the Colorado Clean Energy Fund, the Nevada Clean Energy Fund. But truly with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund has seen massive growth across the country, and not just with states, but also with tribal organizations and with rural focus. There's really such a significant reach and opportunity to use clean energy investments as a catalytic tool for economic development. I think that's really a kind of exciting opportunity here. As much as we are going to make investments in technologies, and we can talk about how you're able to use the public dollars to leverage private dollars, but I just don't want to lose sight in the recipients of these funds. The Biden administration's Justice 40 is just a beginning, right? Coalition for Green Capital sees it as a baseline. We want to shoot for much higher than 40% of the resources reaching low-income and disadvantaged communities. We're a lead applicant for the National Clean Investment Fund and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, and we are supporting Solar for All applications, but and closing a gap in particular markets. And so, Yeah, as I mentioned, Coalition for Green Capital has worked on this specific topic for over a decade, and we're really optimistic and looking forward to what the future of the Green Bank movement looks like, and are incredibly grateful for all of the federal resources that are coming forward, and looking forward to supporting everyone across the state of Massachusetts.
Thanks, Nita. Paul, tell us about your proposal.
Excellent segue. Very well done. Well, first, thank you, David, for inviting me. Thank you, Lee, for being a moderator. And thank you to Bert and Nina for both your presentations and for the work of your organizations. The Connecticut Green Bank has actually been extremely helpful in the Massachusetts efforts, has sent people up to Massachusetts to give briefings and testimony over the last 8 years at our State House here in Boston. And the Coalition for Green Capital has also been a great partner as we've developed legislation and now started to put something for real in place. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Senator Ed Markey. He had a great point. It's always great to have great ideas, but great ideas go even better when there's money available to make them reality. And Senator Markey was instrumental in making sure that there's going to be this national money available for our states to compete for. And I think that's a big driver about finally getting some success on a bill I've been filing for a very long time. And just to talk about the background, the process, and where we are in Massachusetts and what we think the future holds. This came to me from people in Western Massachusetts, from people in my district, mostly in Greenfield and in Franklin County, Western Mass. And back in, I think, 2014, there was a different bill about financing green projects called Commercial PACE. And it was a good bill. It's a good concept. But for whatever reason, the bill that was filed at the time included natural gas as one of the clean, renewable, green energies. And in my community that I represented, and personally, I agree with the members of my community, that didn't seem like the right move to going to green and renewable and sustainable. And so I asked the lead sponsor of that bill at the time if he would be willing to, work with some kind of a friendly amendment to make some changes. He was not willing. And instead of going head to head with a different legislator, I decided to do some research. I worked with a lot of people, again, in my district, in my region, and we explored this idea of the Green Bank, and we saw what was happening in Connecticut. They were beginning to do the work in New York. I heard about Hawaii. Unfortunately, I never got to visit out there to see it in practice, but someday. And we came up with a bill that was filed for the first time in 2015. We had 2-year sessions in Massachusetts. Got a little bit of traction, didn't really go that far. Filed it again in 2017. 2019, I filed it for a third time. Started getting a little bit more partnership from other legislators, a little more advocacy from activist groups from around Massachusetts. And I think something that really had an impact was we brought the Speaker of the House at the time out to Greenfield, and we brought at the time the chair of our Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee out to Greenfield. They were both harangued by people who, of course, wanted to share their thoughts on what a great concept this was, and to give them real examples of projects in Massachusetts and in Western rural Massachusetts that could have benefited from having this availability of this type of financing dedicated to climate and renewable goals. And we undertook a bill in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. It was called GreenWorks. It was going to be $1 billion. It was going to be $100 million a year for essentially revolving loan funds, very similar to a green bank. And 10% of it was going to be dedicated to rural communities, and 10% of it was going to be dedicated to coastal communities, which was extremely important. And we passed that, I believe it was in February 2020. And then for whatever reason, the next month, it all got sidelined. Other things took center stage, and COVID pandemic really killed us. And if you think back to government finances, state government finances in April, May of 2020, there was a moment we didn't think the state was going to make payroll. We were that worried. We didn't know Washington was going to come through for us in a big way and how things were going to turn out. And so we fast forward, President Biden's elected, Infrastructure Act is passed, Senator Ed Markey's instrumental role in making sure Green Bank funding is available, and we have a new governor elected in Massachusetts, Maura Healey. One of Maura Healey's first actions is to appoint for the first time a climate chief that is intended to be dedicated to meeting climate goals, making the best climate progress, and navigating over multiple agencies in Massachusetts to make sure that they're all rowing in the same direction and that they're all trying to undertake goals and make progress in the same way. She sees my bill, she hears about the concept, she knows what has happened in the House in 2019, 2020, right before COVID, and she begins conversations with my office, with Representative Joe Moschino out of the Situate area, out on coastal Massachusetts, and in a matter of months, she has a plan, she pitches it to the governor gives it a green light, and the governor makes an announcement in the Massachusetts State House announcing the first Massachusetts bank, the first Massachusetts Green Bank, and the first Green Bank dedicated to housing, the Massachusetts Community Climate Bank. And so what this looks like, and we're working side by side with the administration, with the climate chief, with the Executive Office of Housing, as they undertake this endeavor and try to make this a reality and try to get things up in place as quickly as possible. The first step, with $50 million seeded from the Massachusetts state government, is going to get an entity up and running that is going to at first be dedicated to helping decarbonize housing, decarbonize buildings, decarbonize places where people are going to live. And I think Bert mentioned this, like this is something that can be expensive for both people that are either looking to sell, looking to upgrade, or even looking to develop new housing. And housing, we're in a crisis here in Massachusetts. I imagine it's the same in Connecticut. I imagine it's the same as in many states around the country. And so I appreciate this focus. I think it has a lot of potential. We still have a bill that is working its way through the legislature. There's actually 4 bills. One filed by me, one by Rep. Moschino, and then 2 different similar bills filed by 2 different legislators, but all with the same goal of, let's see how this is going to work, and let's see statutorily, what do we need to codify? What do we need to make sure? I still care a lot, representing 57 communities, 56 of which are pretty rural, making sure that at least 10% of that is going to go to small towns, go to small communities. Rep. Moschino, and I'm right there side by side with her, wants to make sure that this goes to coastal communities, because coastal mitigation, flooding mitigation is extremely important. And so as we work side by side with the Massachusetts Community Climate Bank, we're looking forward to seeing how they roll it out. We're getting ready as soon as they have the answers to have forums around the state, have webinars around the state that's going to explain to people, both residents and organizations and developers, to explain to them how they're going to be able to tap in this. And then maybe, most importantly out of everything I'm saying, we're hoping that the $50 million and the establishment of this entity is going to get us in Massachusetts involved in that competition for the $27 billion, help us get a sizable amount of that, and then deliver on so many other climate goals that were part of what drove me to file this in the first place almost 9 years ago, and that I know will complement the great work being done in Connecticut, the great work being done, and the goals of the Coalition for Green Capital, and I think really the intention of what the Congress and the President Biden intended with the infrastructure bill and with the inclusion of this funding. So thank you for letting me give a brief summary, and I am happy to answer questions most specifically on legislative efforts, where we go next, and anything else in the government realm that people think could be helpful.
Terrific. Okay, well, in a little while, we should turn it over to the audience, but I wanted to have a bit of a conversation first and hog you for some questions that I have, the 3 of you. So with a lot of the industrial policy investments that we're seeing, I feel like these are things that have been fought for years, if not decades. And Mark, you had such a great, Senator Mark, great description of how you've been fighting for a long time to bring this to fruition. But it's kind of a now comes the hard part moment. And I think I'd love to get into some of the more specifics of the kinds of projects you're conceiving of and how you design these institutions, how they become exciting, but also self-sustaining, some of the different sort of competing priorities you're balancing. So I hope you'll all speak to this, but just like maybe a couple questions to get you started off. Bert, to you, I mean, one thing that seems great about being in the private sector in some ways is that you're not accountable to the public and you're free to experiment for that reason. How do you get the freedom to take risks on exciting opportunities that might pan out or might not pan out? And how do you kind of think about putting enough risk on a public balance sheet that it's worthwhile and that you're reaching for really big and exciting opportunities, but then not taking on so much risk that you go under, it becomes some kind of scandal? Like, how do you kind of balance those goals? and more broadly to that point, are there technologies or projects that are particularly well suited or badly suited to green finance? Nina talked about and really emphasized the importance of the specific communities that are being targeted by this financing, and thinking about where this new capital is going to flow. Maybe could you speak a little bit to why these communities have been financially, I know it's a big topic, but like why they've been financially underserved, why private banking or non-green banking isn't serving them currently, and why you think public green banks or nonprofit green banks could do a better job. And yeah, maybe we could start with that, and you and Senator, feel free to jump in too, but talk a little bit about the specific. Oh, sorry. The other thing I wanted to ask was about sort of on project design. Like there are just so many different types of green projects that could receive green finance. It struck me as an interesting choice that the GGRF, for instance, this new national fund, seems to really be targeting kind of homeowners and consumers. Like it's not, for instance, a green bank for manufacturing. We're doing tons of, new green industrial policy, but that's not the type of project that it centers. And so maybe say a little bit on, just get a little more specific on the types of projects that you're seeing, and then how to balance having enough risk taking and not too much risk taking.
Well, if you ask one more question, Lee, I was going to say that you're qualified for the White House press corps. So, but let me try to get to some of these. First of all, maybe I'll start in reverse, because you started to talk about kind of how the funds are to be used, industrial versus like residential and for homeowners, or kind of in the community, so to speak. Let's keep in mind there that the Biden administration, and let's say thank God for the Biden administration, bringing back energy policy and bringing, actually working to get money, invested in our green economy, which is not only going to help us solve the climate crisis, but actually do so much for employment. I mean, there are going to be just tons of jobs that will emanate from this policy that is being put in place. But you had the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed. I'm pretty sure that was 2021, at the end of 2021. And so, that was like the initial bill. I think that was $1 billion or $1.3 billion, $1.4 billion, something like that. I remember there was a lot of discussion over it. Started at 4 and it ended less. But the fact is that was really more on the industrial side. So dollars were provided for infrastructure to kind of kickstart that. And but the Inflation Reduction Act does really focus more on communities, as well as you do things like EV charging. I mean, there's EVs and electrification of transportation. Those certainly are priority areas for the EPA. Nina, help me out. One is with building net zero buildings. The other I hit on was transportation. I'm missing the third one, which I think was
distributed energy resources.
Of course, how could I forget? Right. So, well, of course, solar for all, for instance. If we just start from there, so how can we forget? So that kind of gives you a sense that the administration is really covering the whole universe here, but with some different policy frames. So what we've in terms of trying to get, and this is why I think Massachusetts, even though it's not full scale like Connecticut, but is starting in the right place. And the reason I say that is because housing is like core to benefiting a number of people. And so if you work with multifamily and an affordable multifamily, you electrify or you improve and retrofit a building, you're going to improve the lives of a lot of people, as opposed to going one by one by one. Not to say that isn't bad, going single family homes, but saying that you can really have a major impact if you take on the building sector, as well as commercial and industrial, small business, that kind of thing. Which, but I think mass housing, if I'm not incorrect, Paul, the focus is going to be more on dwellings. Is that right?
That's what it sounds like the directive is, but until I see a plan, I don't actually know that. But yeah, that's what it seems
Right.
to be. And I think at this early stage, it seems most logical that they're going to go after the most units at the most bang for their buck. So the most units in each specific building, as opposed to, say, like 3 houses somewhere small, which then from my policy perspective is why I'm really concerned that we make sure rural's included as well. Like, yeah, you could spend the $50 million in just Boston or just New Bedford, and it will have an amazing impact. But yeah.
Right. So if you consider that the IRA has as a major focus, these dwellings and buildings and so forth. So Massachusetts has got it right. If they had to start somewhere, let's start there. And then you can actually, these can be hubs, resiliency hubs. You can look at that. So you can bring that in with battery storage and that kind of thing. And you can also bring in EV charging, at multifamily, a totally overlooked area. And why is it overlooked? Well, it's overlooked because pretty much the market is driven by contractors and developers, and they're going where the money is and where they know they're going to get people to say yes. And people who say yes are people who have the money. And so you begin to see the picture of why these areas are underserved. So if we can help with bringing the money in through the IRA, to kind of spark some of this investment and use mechanisms like the Green Bank that's being established, up in Massachusetts through mass housing, then we're going to start to see some real transactions being done. The other thing is to appreciate, though, is that the reason housing is difficult is the way, say, affordable housing is financed. There's a series of tax credit financing. You have to really get into the real nitty-gritty and the dirty finances of these things, and it just takes time. But there is something called midstream investments that are done between refinancings of these properties, and so you can get a lot done. But that's where this Green Bank at mass housing is going to be so instrumental, because now there's a source of capital to come in and take these risks, because sometimes you can't quite get the perfect security that certain lenders, banks, may look for in these transactions, and other capital providers. But that's where a state-sponsored Green Bank can appreciate that, guess what? This housing isn't going anywhere. These people are going to be living there for decades. So it might not have the perfect security, but it does have a number of indications of cash flow and capital structure that a government can get comfortable with. Okay, and government can also has ways of being comfortable and encouraging loan performance where, say, the private sector may not, and it can use other levers of government to make things happen. So as far as technology is concerned, I think you mentioned about technology. Some of the technologies that are coming in for building electrification, heat pumps is a big thing, and that's where another part of the IRA, with all of the tax credit incentives, is going to come in. So there are many dimensions to the Inflation Reduction Act. We're focusing right now on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is the cash that's going to come to the communities through the green banks, through other community lenders. But there are a host of tax credits and incentives that are going to be rolling into the states. Once I believe it's DOE that is moving that money, but a lot of those incentive dollars are going to start running. So you combine the incentives, you combine the financing. Another aspect of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is money for technical assistance, because a lot of these community bankers or startup green banks, they're going to need some help in terms of dealing with some of the cost of understanding feasibility studies, other analyses that need to be done. And the money from the IRA is going to be able to provide for that, or in part. So it's really a combination. All of these things are going to help. Now, as far as risk, we take a balanced approach to risk. One thing we don't do is we don't do venture capital. So we're not involved in funding startups. We actually do have an arm of government that does that. It's called Connecticut Innovations, and they will fund startups and technology, biotech, and things of that sort. So if anybody comes to our door and wants to do that kind of thing, or that they're at that stage for that type of enterprise, we'll focus them over there. So what we're doing is we're working with established technologies, solar, heat pumps, lighting, and other technologies that are out there, but they're established. They have track records, and they're improving year by year. So there are new innovations year by year, but they're gradual, they're incremental. So we're not really taking technology risk. What you do see is a need to have innovation in terms of like marketing approaches, reaching markets. I'll give you an example. Back in 2014, a company called Posigen approached us with a desire to come into the Connecticut market. They had established they're a solar developer, solar energy efficiency developer, and they were operating out of Louisiana, southern Louisiana primarily, but all over Louisiana. But they got started post Katrina, and when they were rebuilding, they said, let's build back cleaner as well as better. So they wanted to put solar and solar thermal for hot water on the rooftops of the affordable housing that was going up, being recreated for the people that had been displaced. So they did that, and then they were looking for a new market. They came to Connecticut, they came to New York. We said, we're having trouble reaching these populations. We've got plenty of people who have means and can afford solar, but we're not reaching lower income markets. They applied into an RFP that we did, and the model that they brought was twofold: community marketing, so blanketing an entire community with campaigns, getting the friends and neighbors. It's almost like Solarize, which was a program developed in Massachusetts for solar, and which we imported into Connecticut. Thank you very much, Massachusetts, for a great idea. And but it was a community-based marketing to kind of stoke interest in solar, and they're using those techniques. But also what they're doing is they're using a different way to underwrite transactions. They don't look at FICO scores, and that allows them to go into low and moderate income families and sell them the benefits of solar by reducing their energy bills. And they're saying, we're going to cut your energy bills by 30%. If you just put solar on your rooftop, and it happens and it works. So these are the kinds of models that we've been able to support that have reached these communities that previously have not been experiencing clean energy. I think I hit a number of your questions, Lee. Maybe I missed any.
No, you did super well. Okay, maybe I'll give one more question and to Senator Mark, well, to all of you. Let's see. I mean, one thing that I know has been a national debate that's been somewhat resolved by the way that the GGRF is structured is that there are kind of virtues to centralization and also virtues to community engagement, that if you have a super centralized bank, it can be scaled up more easily, it can coordinate more easily, but also you want kind of local lenders who have, in theory, community trust and relationships and visibility into communities. Would you talk about balancing those trade-offs and how you coordinate? What are the virtues of centralization actually? And then like how are you going to work? How are you going to do this kind of coordinating work? And yeah, maybe after that we'll go to the audience questions.
Well, why don't I hit that a little bit? And Nina, if I miss anything, or Paul, if you have anything you want to throw in. The benefits of a national green bank is really to kind of be able to deploy capital across the market, for a few reasons. Sometimes there'll be states that don't have green banks, but they have green projects. So you'll want to have a mechanism where you can reach those markets where, say, there could be, I'll just use the term, a blue city in a red state. And so, you know, how do you reach those areas where they're having health impacts, and their community wants clean energy, but they're in a red state, and so there's no policy support for that, or the policy support is inadequate. But so you can have a national green bank that can work with the communities. You know, they're with municipalities. They'll establish an apparatus to be able to import the capital, set up a 501c3 perhaps, and get things started through a green financing organization. Yeah, maybe it's a green bank, but maybe it's kind of not quite there yet. But an organization like CGC can support that effort, you know, at a national level and do that. There can be regional transactions that need to be supported that cross state lines. That can be an area where a CGC type of entity can support the kind of cross between states and regions where there could be a need for that kind of activity. You know, think of say EV chargers up and down Interstate 95. You know, from Massachusetts down to Maryland, just to say, for instance. And if we wanted to do something there, you know, that would be a possibility. So, but at the same time, you have to ultimately reach people on the ground in their communities, and that's why a network of state green banks, and we even have community or rather county level green banks. Nina mentioned the Montgomery County, Maryland Green Bank. I'm actually on the board of that green bank, and you know, and they're having an impact. The Montgomery County is 1 million people, a very substantial piece of real estate with a lot of buildings, and they need assistance in order to achieve their environmental goals. So, but working with local green banks, state and local green banks, community development financial institutions, credit unions. You know, we work with our local CDFIs. One in particular, largest in the state. We've provided about $70 million of funding into that CDFI to do what? To finance residential solar and energy efficiency, as well as funding for affordable housing energy efficiency retrofits. Now we haven't provided the entire 70 million, but we've been in partnership with banks. So by our being in these transactions, these facilities, that has given banks more comfort of coming in and saying, yeah, we'll join with you and lend. And quite often we'll take what's called a subordinated position. So the senior lender will get paid first and we'll get paid second. So if there's a risk of repayment, then we're going to absorb that risk first. Now, typically the transactions we do, we recognize they're going to be paid. Might there be a period of time where, you know, there's a slow pay or whatever? That's what we're there for, and so we can bridge that gap. So by reaching into and with the credit unions, we've established a loan facility or loan program called Smart E. And we established this program around a network of credit unions and community banks. We provide what's called a loan loss reserve to take care of excess losses in the portfolio to get these credit unions and community banks comfortable with lending. And in return for that loss reserve, they cap their interest rates. They agree to lend for 10, 12, even 20 years, where they wouldn't have dreamed of doing that, you know, without the presence of a green bank. So by being in the market, we're able to, you know, bring down, so you don't get consumers that get these 0% interest rates for 6 months. And then if you don't pay in the 7th month, it turns into 25% or 28%, right? These are steady Eddie rates that are maybe 6%, you know, for 10 years. And they're very affordable. And they're great deals for the credit unions because they end up getting customers as a result. So they get customers to bring their business in. So you get a combination. One more thing to say about centralization. As these local lenders start to do all of this lending, there's going to be a need to kind of refresh the capital that they have. So a centralized green bank that CGC has can purchase these loans, put them into loan pools, and then refresh that in the marketplace, and in that way, you know, get more liquidity and capital back into the lenders and develop a cycle that goes again and again. So there's a way that, you know, you need to have some kind of a central organizing way of bringing that about, and actually teaching the local lenders how they can participate in that activity. And right now, it's not really possible. It's very difficult. There's some of that going on, but it's a struggle, and it's a struggle because the lenders who would do that are trying to apply like asset-based securities, theory and practice of you know, how Wall Street works in community lending. And there's a lot of friction in that process, and it gets very difficult and it gets very expensive. So if we can spread that across hundreds of community lenders at a centralized level, then it becomes affordable and it becomes easier to do.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think we should get into the audience questions. Let's see. So our first questioner asks, oh, a good point, which I think goes to the risk question. Are these funds loans with payback from savings or outright grants? Meaning green bank.
Well, go ahead, Nina. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund allows for both, but it depends on which competition the money came from, right?
Yes, it depends on the competition, but I also would say it would depend on the structure of the green bank. And I wonder if Senator Mark, you know, could address some of his thoughts, or as they were developing the concept of the statewide entity, how you were all thinking about the different loan products, if at all. But it varies from state to state, but I think it would be helpful for a Massachusetts context.
Yeah, the biggest component from the financing perspective was there's a bill that put the Green Bank in the CEC, the Massachusetts CEC. Those bills went to one committee, and then what the governor is proposing put the Green Bank in this Executive Office of Housing, because her and Climate Chief Melissa Hoffer, their big thing was Department of Housing has more experts on financing and has a financing perspective. And while they want to make sure we meet the goals, what's underlying in the policy goals, what's really important is if this thing is a bust, if it just gives out money and doesn't make any money and no one knows how to handle any of the financial aspects. So that's like from a policy perspective, the legislature and the governor have been considering that. The governor played her card that she thinks housing is where they can best hit the financing aspect. And that's where like the bill is still alive. 2 of the bills have gone to telecommunications, utilities, and energy, so more policy perspective. And 2 of the bills, including the one I filed, have actually gone to our Committee on Financial Services, where there's more of a perspective of, yeah, how are we going to make this thing viable from the financial aspect? But definitely things we've had to consider.
So to that point, sometimes it is a loan that requires repayment, but not repayment just purely because of savings. It's repayment because it is a loan. But to Bert's point about interest rates, the loans don't tend to be cost prohibitive. You don't want to make it more challenging for the household. And then as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is going to create new funding channels, it's going to be a combination of, there's a ton of tax credits and different incentives. So we're thinking about how to build in all of those resources. So it's little to no upfront cost to households to make these investments.
The next person asks, is there any advice that panelists have on how a municipality could integrate the function of green banks into their climate action plans?
I think that's a fantastic question. I started off my career in urban planning, so I've worked on quite a few community plans and conversations around climate action plans. So green banks can be seen as the vehicle to finance different aspects within your climate action plan. So as you're thinking about shifting from plan into implementation, you can specify with your whomever the government level is that's managing the climate action plan, when you start to think about what are the actual infrastructure aspects that need to be invested in. And I think Lee mentioned about this before, like this is also an industrial policy that's being implemented through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So think about it as part of your locale's capital infrastructure investments. Like what type of grid related investments and infrastructure around EV charging and just so many different aspects of it can be incorporated into your climate action plans, and again using the green banks to finance different parts of it over time.
Timothy Hovel asks, I'd like to hear in concrete terms how you plan to use these funds to incentivize private investors into co-investing in the sorts of projects the Green Bank wants to extend financing to. What's the revenue model? How's saving energy and housing going to repay the loan? Is this something akin to PACE financing, which has already been around for so many years?
I think Bert provided quite a few examples that address this explicitly. Bert, do you want to reiterate some of your points or maybe go to the next question?
Sure. Well, I would just say that, for example, a clear use that the green banks can have is to do a program like Smarty, like I described, to give you some thought about how much of a loan loss reserve is really put up. It's generally about 5%, maybe 7% of the amount of the facility. So if you think about that, you have 12, 15 times leverage in terms of attracting private capital into a facility like that. Now, not every facility is like that. Not every facility works like that. Back to the Posigen example that I mentioned earlier, we started out by capitalizing that probably on the order of about 40% was green bank capital. Now, green bank capital makes up about 5% of the facility. So over time, it has been de-risked. The market has gotten more used to lending to these types of transactions. They've gotten used to the alternative underwrite model, a number of lenders said, no, we won't touch anything unless you take a FICO score. And that's where a number of lenders are. But over time, with data that is proven that these facilities pay back, these customers pay back over time, and low default rates, that tends to attract capital. So the mechanisms really are through, specifically, there are partnerships that are put together for solar, and the lenders come in through lending through one part of the partnership, in combination with investors that use the tax credits that are associated with that. I just described Smart E. In terms of like commercial PACE, the way transactions are done there by the private market is they package and securitize those transactions, every month. They're new. There's private capital going in. Now, if you look at a green bank, we started off by securitizing. We were the first to securitize CPACE, exclusive CPACE benefit assessments. We did that back in 2014. So we actually led the market in understanding, that kind of activity. Today, we're holding those transactions on our balance sheet, but we know that we can securitize those at any time. How might we do that? We've issued Green Liberty bonds. So we have securitized renewable energy credits that are associated with solar. We have issued Green Liberty notes, which are 1-year instruments available for only $100. You can go on our website. You can just do CT Green Bank and Bond Link. And if you Google that, you'll get right to the site. The site will tell you about all these fantastic ways that we monetize and issue bonds. And that's private capital too, right? But it's private capital from citizen investors that are coming into these transactions. $100 you can invest in small business trying to do retrofits in Connecticut. And what we hope to do is by establishing those mechanisms and doing the initial legwork, we're opening up the methodology for doing that for green banks all over the country that can use that and replicate it. And that's what it's about.
Okay, another question where I think you addressed some of it, but how do interest rates of green bank loans compare to rates from banks?
They vary depending upon the risk, the maturity, whether it needs to be concessional, meaning are we trying to incentivize and promote a particular activity? For example, we have lower interest rates, and when I say lower, I mean the vicinity of 3 and 4%, where we have lent to affordable housing. To put that in perspective, if we have to issue a bond, maybe not in today's market because interest rates are a bit higher, but let's say before the more recent run-up in interest rates, we were able to issue bonds for an interest rate of about 3 or 3.5%, and pay that back over a period of 5 to 10 years. And the interest rates are probably 100 basis points or 150 basis points higher than that. But that gave us comfort that we could go into the market and we could raise capital and put it out and at least break even. All right, assuming no risk of loss. And we tend to look at these transactions and we feel very confident that we're going to get our money back. First of all, in many transactions, we're not doing 100% financing for affordable multifamily. There's some equity or investment that is involved in a number of the transactions, or there's coverage by the energy savings, so that we do value energy savings. We'll say how much is the energy savings covering the debt service. So we'll do some concessional interest rates, but then if we're in a project finance, meaning we're doing a fuel cell project or a wind project, where we're actually substituting, by being subordinated debt, we're substituting for equity that maybe the sponsor doesn't have, but we still want to encourage the project. We're going to get a higher return. And those returns can be in the vicinity of anywhere from 8 to 10%. So, which we find is a reasonable return for the risk that we're taking, because it's still got a good coverage ratio, albeit subordinated. So, we tend to be in that range. We'll be down to 4%. Our commercial PACE rates, we happen to have a split rate. We have a rate for small business projects. We want to encourage small business to do these projects. We'll be in the 5% range, but for larger projects, we'll be in the six or so range. So it really depends upon the type of project, the maturity. The longer maturity tends to be a higher rate.
Great. Another question you're asking, this is something I wanted to ask you both about the DOE's loan programs office. I think it calls it something slightly different, but Jigar Shah is such a hero at the moment, and it has gotten deservedly lots of attention. The questioner points out that the loan programs office showed private equity firms that investments in solar can be a reliable revenue stream, which can be securitized via standard financial instruments. Is that a model you're seeking to emulate?
Yeah, well, we have already. We've issued bonds. As I mentioned, the Green Liberty Bond, we securitized renewable energy credits, which those credits are linked to the production of residential solar panels in the state of Connecticut. So yes, we've already done that. A innovation that has come from the loan program office, though, as a result of the Biden infrastructure law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, where they actually got an appropriation to activate this change, is through something called State Energy Financing Institutions, or the SEFI program. That relates to what's called Title 17 and loans that the loan program office can do for projects, but they tend to require an innovation element as part of the requirement for government financing. If you have a state energy financing institution or a SEFI involved, and we are a SEFI, green banks are SEFIs, state green banks are SEFIs, then that opens the door for this financing from the loan program office. Currently, we're working on 2 transactions. One is public. It's been discussed in a committee at the Green Bank in our board level, so I can disclose it because it's in our records. One SEFI is we're working on right now is for Posigen. They're working on a facility with the loan program office, and so that's active and hopefully will come through for community solar, as I was describing earlier. Another transaction is relating to energy efficiency. I can't disclose the name, but so we're working on one there. And then there's another transaction we're looking at that involves EVs and fleets of EVs. That's a third one. So, and with that each of these transactions may involve more than one SEFI, where a few green banks will get together and contribute to the requirement of participation in the SEFI facility with the loan program office and open up the financing, which from loan program office is the treasury rate plus 3/8%, and it can be up for 30 years, out to 30 years, which is very helpful in a transaction.
One question I have just to jump in that I wanted to ask about is there are a number of startups in this space that I think have sometimes drawn financing from green banks and similar institutions that do residential retrofits and kind of specialize in financing them. Sealed, block power. There are a couple of other local and national institutions that are private, but looking to partner, I think, with green banks on this kind of work. Would you talk a little bit about private partnerships with those kinds of like specialized green project financiers?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there've been those are two that are active. There are others that are coming along, fintech type of programs where they try to standardize their approaches in terms of customer acquisition, technologies, and that's a good thing, because only through a well-developed program of standardization of approaches, I think you can bring the cost down and deliver value for customers. It's very important that quality assurance as well as consumer protection aspects be respected. We don't want people to be wrapped into long-term contracts where they're not seeing any savings or benefits. That'll just turn people away from this and give the industry a bad name. So yes, I mean, we look at, for example, hate to go back to Positium, but they're actually doing it. They're doing solar, but they're also doing energy efficiency at the same time. And it's a programmatic approach to doing it. They're not the only one. Block Power is one, and there are others. Sealed is doing. They do a very good job. The New York Green Bank actually has financed Sealed, so it's another example of how green banks are working with those types of operations.
Okay. Let's see what else is coming in on the Q&A. There have been a couple questions for Senator Mark, who I think is on audio. Let's see. So John asks, if the governor's Green Bank initiative focused on low-income housing receives federal funding on top of the 50 from the state, are you hoping and expecting that those federal funds should be used to expand the Green Bank's purvey to include other types of green projects? And Senator Mark says in the chat, yes, I'd like the extra funding to expand the work of Massachusetts Green Banks beyond purely housing and decarbonization. Let's see. Oh, someone asks about geothermal district heating. So she says, Massachusetts has a huge problem with what looks like dissolving methane/natural gas pipelines in urban areas. Experiments currently underway to use the gas company union workers and the street rights of way to displace these dissolving pipelines with geothermal district heating systems. Can the Green Bank be used to deal with this enormous and dangerously explosive problem? Sounds like a question for Senator Mark, but if he's not on, I don't know. Nina, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, that's definitely a Senator Mark question. And then as it applies to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, EPA is very clear about eligible uses for funding. And so that would not fall into that. But I think like the person making the comment, it's a pretty vital infrastructure problem that definitely should be addressed at the state level.
Yeah, I'll just mention, I don't know if Senator Mark is responding, but I'll just mention that there is a pilot program that Eversource in Massachusetts has underway with district heating. In fact, is so popular, it was oversubscribed. And what they did is basically took a neighborhood and offered to provide district heating for that neighborhood, and you had to sign up for it. It was very easy to sign up. I think they made it practically costless. and you're just paying for the energy. But the idea is it's more efficient because it's a shared thermal resource. So so they're doing that, and as soon as we saw that, we actually called up Eversource. We have Eversource down here in Connecticut, but we made our way up to Eversource in Massachusetts to talk to the team that was doing that, because we said, yeah, we'd like to consider that in terms of doing something like that in Connecticut. So we actually have that on the whiteboard, as far as trying to see what we can do with our regulator, with our utility down here, to see if we can do some shared thermal resource, and because those systems are very efficient.
Great. David, I wonder, any questions from you or from beyond the Q&A?
I don't have anything other than what's in the Q&A. So maybe we can take up another question or two from there.
Let's see. We've run through most of them. I think there's some questions kind of getting at the point of creating green jobs and green tradespeople. How are you thinking about attaching high quality workforce standards and making sure that the folks employed by these projects are getting a good deal? Is that something that comes into your purview as you think about the financing, or is that left more to developers?
It's certainly part of the IRA. Nina, did you want to maybe speak to that? Or
Yeah, it's a requirement within any applicant to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund has to provide a workforce development plan. But in general, there are, several dozen different IRA programs to build out kind of the green labor force. And so you have the Build America, Buy America is going to be pretty significant in increasing manufacturing of clean energy related technologies and products. And so then that will lead to increased workforce development opportunities there. But in general, to everyone's point, yes, you need the workforce in order to complete all of the different types of tasks and services over time. So it is, I mean, every year Connecticut, provides a report about the amount of jobs that are created. I mean, that's always been embedded in the work. But now with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's such an explicit requirement. There are going to be project labor agreements and community benefit agreements. I was speaking at an event earlier today with some staff from DOE. DOE is going to create a new community benefits agreement that is attached to every single investment that they make. I mean, there's just going to be like significant shifts across the federal government. And so it's going to be an all hands on deck effort to figure out how to build out these programs. I mean, we keep talking about all of the great things happening in Connecticut, but a reporter from the New Yorker recently wrote an article about a high school that has a job training program to help get young individuals into the trades to become licensed tradespeople. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the article, but there are some really great best practices. And back to Lee's question about the benefits of centralization, when you have a national entity that can also help do policy advocacy and elevate the best practices. I mean, part of that's education reform, right? If you're trying to get more high schools that bring back the trades as eligible use of a child's time to figure out, what potential pathway they can pursue. Doing it on a state-by-state basis is going to move so slowly. So if you have a national centralized entity doing advocacy at the federal level to help increase training for workforce development, I think we will collectively benefit.
Great. Sherry asks, could Bert describe how the Connecticut Green Bank programs and area of emphasis have shifted over time?
Sure. I'll give you a couple of examples. When we started out, we worked on a solar fund, and we established that solar fund because we had contractors who didn't have access to a marketplace, because an expanding marketplace. It was very limited because the people who could afford solar were people who could write a check or take a withdrawal out of their home equity account or something like that. You have to think back of this is going back to 2012, and so we put together this solar fund with U.S. Bank and some local lenders to leverage it, so that the Green Bank didn't have to put very much money into the transaction, maybe about 15 or 20% of the overall capital raise. But we did that, and we did that for it did about 50 megawatts of solar between commercial solar and residential solar. But at the end of it, we had to make a decision. Do we continue it? Do we do another fund? Do we capitalize another fund? But what we discovered was the national solar companies had discovered Connecticut. They saw what was happening with the Green Bank and its solar fund. They saw how we had organized the contractors, and so they started to come into the market and tried to wanted to transition these contractors to their platforms. So we decided we were going to step back from that activity and let the private market take over. Another example was we established the first solar loan in the country that did not have a security interest in the property. So there were a number of solar loans that were being issued, but they all required like a second mortgage on the home, or the alternative was that they were from a particular manufacturer. Like you had to use this particular manufacturer of solar panels if you wanted to have a solar loan. You had some of those going on, but generally solar loans didn't exist. We actually created that with a Massachusetts company called SunGage, and brought forward that product, and we did about 250 loans in the state. And guess what? The SunGage came to us after about 18 months, and they said, we actually found private capital that will do this activity without Green Bank money. So we declared victory and moved on and said, the private market actually recognizes the value of these transactions. But it took a Green Bank to kind of stimulate the market and put it on the map. So what we've done over time is we've been moving to transactions that are more wholesale based, meaning we're working more through actors like Posigen, like a company called Butterfly that does energy efficiency for quick serve restaurants, and they do it with thousands of participants in a number of states, including Connecticut. They actually happen to be Connecticut based. But we're working on these models that are really operating at scale in technologies that are very, very interesting. They're proven, but they're using different marketing approaches to bring these technologies in. We've also started to do much more in state projects. Going back to 2012 through 2017, 18, even 2019, we weren't doing any state projects. Now what we're doing is we're assisting our state in some of their procurement of energy. And because there are a number of state facilities that can use solar, rooftop solar, ground mounts, and so forth. So we're able to use our expertise that we've acquired over the years, run requests for proposals, and get these installations of projects at the lowest possible cost. We do a lot of that, and we're also working with municipalities to do more solar for schools, an activity that has grown over time, but we're doing a fair amount of that, as well as for other municipal buildings. So we've kind of shifted into an area where, and we're really staying out of areas where we would be stepping on the toes of the private sector, where that's well established and the capital is flowing and it's very competitive. So we're tending to stay out of those areas. When we participate, we'll participate as a partner, and that's so that we can get bring benefits to the project by adding debt service coverage points to the transaction by being a subordinated player, as I mentioned earlier. So that's how we're tending to play these days.
Great. Well, this is fascinating, and I'm sure we could keep discussing, but should I hand it over to David to wrap up?
Okay. Well, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our panelists, our moderator, and to our attendees for joining us this evening. Please consider registering for the remaining forum in this series, Creating Sustainable Systems, Soil, Carbon, and Food, which will be on September 28th, by following the registration link that we will put in the chat. And in case you missed the first webinar, Nuclear Power, Expensive Menace or Low Carbon Solution, please note that the entire series will be available on the ECA YouTube channel. You will be receiving an email with links to the first two webinars in this series. And thank you all for coming. That ends our webinar. Good evening.